We found government contracts, government money. We found this secret network, the secret portal that they had set up in which they could communicate directly with chemical industry executives and government officials. We had some currently 30 USDA members who are participating or were members of this portal. It went on. And what you see were very real, very impactful examples of this network and these people working to suppress criticism and opposition in foreign countries of pesticides.
Hello, everyone. It's Ken Cook, and I'm having another episode. This one is brought on by a really stunning piece of investigative journalism that pulls back the curtain on how the pesticide industry really operates to affect public policy and affect all our lives. And I'm not just talking about in the United States, but how they operate to nefarious purposes and ends globally. This is an investigation that was published in The Guardian, Le Monde, and The New Lede. And The New Lede is a publication of EWG's independent journalism program. And we're going to be talking to the woman who leads that. It revealed the inner workings of a U.S. government-funded private social network that's designed and operated to attack critics of pesticides. And this is exactly the reason why EWG established a journalism initiative to have great reporters have the time and space to dig deep into some of these stories. The piece is called Defend or Be Damned: How a U.S. Company Uses Government Funds, that means your funds, to suppress pesticide opposition around the world. And my guest today is my colleague and friend, and I think hands down the best reporter on the pesticides beat. I'm talking about Carey Gillam. She's the managing editor of The New Lede, EWG's journalism initiative. And Carey is the person who spearheaded this investigation with colleagues from around the world. So, Carey, I like to think I'm cynical enough that I can't be shocked. But once again, you shocked me with this investigation. The fact that the pesticide industry's PR firm had the chutzpah to find a way to get support from the U.S. government, from U.S. taxpayers for some of these activities was genuinely shocking to someone who prides himself as beyond shock on what pesticide companies are capable of doing. So I'm excited to learn more about how this investigation unfolded. Who else was involved? Welcome to the show, Carey Gillam.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Yeah. I mean, this was many, many months of work, a collaboration from a number of news organizations around the world. The New Lede, as you mentioned, which is our little news outlet that was started up at the initiative of the Environmental Working Group. And we worked hand in hand with Lighthouse Reports, which is a European-based reporting sort of coalition, if you will, that works to gather information and then help spread that around the world through other news outlets. And we worked with reporters at Le Monde and the Humanitarian and different outlets in different countries. So there were 9 partners in total. I was the lead for the U.S. focus. And yeah, I mean, what we found, I'm much like you, I've covered the agrochemical industry since 1998. And I find it hard to be surprised, I guess, by many things. But I was, again, shocked, shocked to see U.S. government. And it's not really U.S. government money, it's our money, right? It's taxpayer money going to these companies. One company in particular called V-Fluence, which we profile and which is at the heart of all of this. And V-Fluence is run by a man who used to run the public relations operation at Monsanto. And he started up this company called V-Fluence, and they do intelligence gathering and monitoring of targets, people that they think threaten the pesticide industry. or threaten genetically modified crop adoption around the world. It's really doing the work of the companies like, Bayer, Monsanto, which is now owned by Bayer, Syngenta, BASF, all of these different companies that sell chemicals and seeds, and find opposition in many cases to their products, as evidence is mounted over the years that these products can do environmental harm, or cause human health harm, or maybe there are concerns in certain countries about just their own protection of seeds and native elements and control of the food supply, et cetera. And yeah, so we found government contracts, government money. We found this secret network, the secret portal that they had set up, in which they could communicate directly with chemical industry executives and government officials. We had some currently 30 USDA members who are participating or were members of this portal. It went on and on. And what you see were very real, very impactful examples of this network and these people working to suppress criticism and opposition in foreign countries of pesticides and GMOs,
Yeah.
and shutting down funding for a conference in Africa. It gets very specific and very aggressive in their tactics.
That was a shocking element of the story. Some of their successes have been very worrisome, right? And I mean, my goodness, the fact that it's our taxpayer money that's helping some of this, the fact that they're not just going after the substantive, reasonable people can disagree about whether we should regulate pesticides, use less of them. They're also going after people. They're going after scientists. They're going after journalists like yourself. They built dossiers in this private social network, right, that really stepped over the boundaries, I thought, in many cases. Can you say a little bit about that, including what they said about you? You had quite a presence in their social network.
Yeah. So as part of this, and an operation that did receive what we've been able to find in the contracts, did receive government funding specifically to create these profiles or these dossiers on these different individuals. Some 500 people from around the world are profiled inside this secret portal. And when we say profiled, some people have several pages on them. Some people just have short mentions. So it really does, range pretty widely. But these are people seen as opposition targets. And they have, everything from your details about your professional career to details about a person's marriage. There's a scientist in London. There's quite a bit in this file about interactions with his wife, and potentially he had an affair, and maybe she had depression and that she killed herself. And there's all of this sort of information.
Yeah.
Names of children, locations, home addresses, cell phone numbers.
Yeah. Way beyond the normal PR battles that we see publicly exposed, where it might be a press release here, an op-ed there in opposition. This is really digging in and looking for potential vulnerabilities and sharing it on a network, I suppose, in the hope that someone would find it valuable. Why would you put it in there if it was considered to be out of bounds or irrelevant?
Exactly. It looks like what this is designed to give people, first of all, to discredit these people in some way, but also to give sort of talking points or information that can be used in a public forum so not only to sway the minds of the people participating in this network, but also to be used publicly against these individuals to discredit them or otherwise harass or intimidate them. What we found from legal experts, while it doesn't seem that this would be illegal in the United States, it does seem that it is illegal perhaps in many different countries, particularly in Europe and some other countries. So, it seems like it really is crossing the line to do this without an individual's permission, without their knowledge, to be putting all of this information together. They had, in my profile, I see information, not only about a horse that my daughter had, when she was very young, and about a situation that my husband was involved in 1999, which is actually before I met my husband, well before, things like that. And then there are crazy sort of allegations, that people are involved as collaborators with Russia. They have that for multiple people. I'm one of the Russian collaborators, according to this file on me, and just a whole range of things, and particularly putting someone's home address in there, a cell phone number.
Yeah, no, I mean, to me, when I read the story, I thought, oh, well, so this is, I thought I knew how the world worked with regard to pesticide company and pesticide lobby advocacy. But this is a completely new dimension. This is sort of the deep state does pesticides. And the deep state, to my view, is mostly the part of the government that's controlled or strongly influenced by corporate interests, by the powerful, by the leaders of major corporations who are very concerned whenever there's a threat that might have a policy dimension to their interests. And clearly here, this was the case. And there was an earlier controversy, I think in France, wasn't there, where Monsanto was caught hiring a PR firm. You know a lot about that, I think, or at least have written about it. Well, say a little bit about that as kind of a precursor, because I saw this as an extension and deepening of that kind of strategy.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely saw that, and I don't know that I'm going to recall all the details, but it very much was, yeah, Monsanto had firms that were doing essentially the same thing, compiling these potentially illegal, and there was an investigation into this, and Bayer, which bought Monsanto, said, we're not doing that. We wash our hands from this. We will not have nothing to do with that kind of behavior or activity. But certainly Monsanto, they went out and investigated farmers, right, and threatened farmers and sued farmers, and they sort of pulled out all the stops in terms of harassment and intimidation tactics against people all around the world. And this very much does seem to be in that vein. And this operation itself has multiple connections back to Monsanto, not just through this Jay Byrne, who founded V-Fluence, but through a group called Academics Review that Monsanto helped start, which became a publicly identified, it was independent of Monsanto, supposedly, that they wanted it to be independent, but they also were a forum for attacking critics of chemical and genetically modified seed products. And Academics Review actually got rolled into a lot of the profiles started sort of with the Academics Review, and it got rolled into this bonus eventus portal. So you have that tie back to Monsanto as well. All roads maybe lead back to Monsanto.
Yeah, kind of an Nixonian enemies list approach to taking on your adversaries. And they were also fairly active, or I don't know how successful they were, pushing back against the European initiative, the Farm to Fork initiative. Can you say a little bit about that? I think that was Le Monde's contributions focused some on that, right?
Yeah. So you saw this effort in Europe, Farm to Fork, to sort of move to a more regenerative, environmentally friendly way of growing food, right? This is sort of what we're looking at here in the US and sort of all around the world as people have become more aware of the environmental harm of the extensive use of pesticides and other chemicals in farming, moving towards that. And you see this group this is part of what they talk about, that they need to, quash that.
Yeah.
And they have been successful, and they take credit in these documents that we obtained. They take credit for slowing that down. It's not dead by any means in Europe, but it certainly is a much weakened initiative, and it has not moved forward at the pace and the success that the proponents hoped. And, part of that, certainly, at least if you take them at their word, is due to the work of these people involved in this secret network.
Now, if you step back, let me just not really devil's advocate, but I think the other side might say, well, organizations in the civil society collaborate internationally. EWG, for example, or Beyond Pesticides, NRDC, all kinds of environmental groups that are engaged on pesticide policy here in the U.S. We might collaborate with groups in Europe from time to time, maybe even other parts of the world, Africa, Latin America, Mexico, on Monsanto issues. EWG doesn't happen to do that very often on pesticide, but it's not unthinkable. So how do you sort of come to conclusions about this is just the normal way of doing business. This is just, like-minded interests finding a way to work together, share information, just like civil society might do. What what's wrong with that equivalency? I'm doing my best
You're not
to
doing your
set it
best.
up.
Well, and come to think of it, I mean, if EWG and Friends of the Earth or whoever are involved in, in getting government money, and you have a secret portal set up and you're profiling, pesticide industry executives, I might want to write a story about that. I mean,
Yeah.
I,
Yeah, I think you should. That doesn't happen. I mean, I don't. We certainly see leaks of corporate information that tell us what they're thinking, and from time to time, obviously, you have been very active in trying to look behind the curtain and see what the companies are really up to. And you've done it with Paraquat, you've done it with the Monsanto papers, and there's a lot to learn when we find out what the companies knew and when they knew it. But on the public interest side, we don't really have anything like that. We wouldn't publish the name and address of a pesticide executive or a pesticide industry lobbyist. We wouldn't share that with a network in the hopes of weaponizing it in some fashion,
yeah.
unleashing creativity.
Or a list
Yeah.
of their children or where their children live,
Yeah.
or, their
Yeah.
children's hobbies, or, a personal issue with a marriage. I mean, that really
Yeah.
crosses a line, I think. And obviously, because of the legal issues in other countries, it's seen that way as well. And to have taxpayer money going in that direction, and there is also a question, and I don't think that readers necessarily have to see something as I see it or as you see it. There may be very many readers who look at this story and say, fine by me. I'm fine with my money being spent that way, and I think chemicals are the way to feed the world. And
Yeah. Of
that is
course.
fine. I mean, the job of journalism is to bring information to light that people can use and either find interesting, or maybe it informs how they vote or what they want to do. And maybe there's a sense of outrage, maybe there isn't. But, our job is to bring facts to light that are being hidden. And very much there was an effort to hide this clearly. This is not something that you could go on the internet and you could Google
That's right.
and get a link and go in and look for it yourself. This was
Yeah.
private. This was not searchable on Google. Even if you did somehow stumble across it, you couldn't get into it without, a member password and all of that to get into it. And there's discussion that they can have conversations in here because nobody can FOIA these conversations. So
No.
rather than do these on government emails, they can just go into this portal and have these conversations. So there very much was an element of secrecy. And when you couple that with the efforts to undermine the sovereignty of, communities in Africa, where a lot of this was going on, the
Yeah.
the food sovereignty and their own ability to determine their path forward in terms of agricultural production and how to feed their people and what they want their environment to look like, undermining that for the gain of these very large and powerful companies that sell these chemicals, it just hits some people
Yeah.
as an injustice.
Yeah.
At the very least, it should be known and should be transparent what's going on and who's behind it.
Yeah, that's right. And now the U.S. government employees that were part of this network were able to determine that they were actively making use of this information to use it against initiatives to regulate pesticides or move in a direction that was, from a policy standpoint, less reliant on
Oh,
pesticides.
sure. Yeah,
Did you see that?
for certain. Yeah, you can definitely see that, particularly in Africa. In our stories, we highlighted some things that were going on in Africa. There were really good examples of that. We had a lot of information about that, but there were many other countries targeted as well throughout Asia, and then of course in Europe, as you discussed. But this isn't necessarily surprising to you or to others who know this industry, but it very much has been sort of the policy of the US government to support genetically modified crops and the adoption of those around the world,
Yeah.
and to support use of pesticides, you know.
Yeah, no, I mean, this information that's exchanged, in sight of, with support of engagement with the U.S. government employees is really worrisome. We're supposed to have these conversations about policy in a transparent and open fashion. And I think we've all been aware for some time that the State Department and other agricultural attaches, other, tentacles of the U.S. government, other parts of the U.S. government aggressively promote genetically modified crops, pesticides that have been developed and are sold by U.S. companies or U.S. controlled companies in whole or in part. We really do have this sort of shadow conversation in some ways going on in international circles amongst government officials and policymakers that runs contrary, I think, to what most Americans would think should be the case, which is, just because it's a U.S. company doesn't mean we should be promoting the sale of pesticides. If the nation that wants to cut back on pesticides or grow food in a different way, be more independent of these chemicals and these farming systems, why should we be supporting that as taxpayers in a way that undermines what they're trying to do in those countries, just so that private interests in the U.S., pesticide interests, can profit?
Exactly. Well, and if you look at it, Syngenta, which is a big client and sells, paraquat, which we've been talking about and we talk about here in this story. V-Fluence is actually being sued. Jay Byrne and V-Fluence, the company that created this secret network, one of their biggest clients for more than 20 years has been Syngenta, which sells paraquat, which has been associated with causation of Parkinson's disease. And Syngenta also sells a number of seeds. Syngenta is not a U.S. company. Syngenta is a Chinese-owned company. Its main headquarters in Switzerland. It is not by any means a U.S. company. And yet money is being funneled, to an organization that is doing the work of Syngenta. Similarly, Monsanto is no longer and not a U.S. company. It is Bayer, which is a German company. So these U.S. taxpayer dollars are going to work that is benefiting companies that are not based in the U.S. by any means.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, our government is very much a supporter of genetically modified crops and pesticides. And there are a lot of people that have a problem with that. And I think that's part of the policy work, right, that EWG and many other organizations have worked on for quite some time.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's always a sort of a shock to me, and this relates back to an earlier investigation you did, and that was also published in The Guardian, in addition to being published by the new Lede, on paraquat, a notorious weed killer, so toxic, just a sip or two can actually kill a person, banned in many, many countries. But, the thing that stands out to me in some ways is why don't these revelations about what the companies knew and when they knew it, or in this case, how pesticide industry lobbyists really operate, identifying individuals, going after their families, talking about their daughter's horse. How can government officials who are responsible for managing our policy on these chemicals ignore this internal information that really makes it clear they're gaming the system and trying to obviously use the system to promote pesticides in a way that's, at minimum questionable? I think for many Americans, it would be against what they would think of as public interest. We want to try and move away from toxic pesticides. We don't want more of them. We don't want to maintain them, especially ones like paraquat that have been on the market. They're decades old. They're really primitive in the way they act in the environment, the way they kill plants. We've tried to move on from that. Why do you think that this kind of context has so little impact on the regulatory process?
Well, clearly, as you know, and we've seen written about and we've heard from whistleblowers, the EPA is a captured agency, right? There's very little doubt or question about that, I think, anymore, at least in the minds of people who pay attention. It just is. And there are efforts, to address that.
Yeah, certainly in this area on pesticides.
Right.
Yeah.
But if you look at the Office of Inspector General reports, the most recent one that came out and prior ones, and you look at different whistleblowers who have come out and testified to Congress. There very much is a real and intensive effort to get the products that these chemical companies want to sell out to market as quickly as possible, and to downplay or ignore or otherwise push to the side scientific evidence of harm that these chemicals cause. And you know better than I would know, I guess, the why behind that, and the money that flows into
Yeah.
Washington and the way the lobbying works and all of that sort of thing. I think when it comes to the question about why would they ignore like reporting that reveals these sorts of things, not everybody does, right? I mean, we have
Yeah.
lawmakers who are
Yeah.
pushing
For
for
sure.
bans on pesticides. We have, letters that are circulating right now in the halls of Congress to be sent to the EPA, demanding that they ban paraquat for all the reasons that have been reported. They're very interested in this story. They're very interested in the money and the secrecy behind it all. And this portal is just sort of one portion of the much larger universe of how government coordinates with industry. We've seen in the past, and we saw in this investigation, where you have companies or organizations working with the companies that are writing the talking points for our
Yeah.
elected officials to speak to the world on policy matters. When they're out there, and how to address things like this. We're very interested in perhaps filing a FOIA to see what communications have been going on between the U.S. government and V-Fluence since our story came out, right? To
Yeah.
see if they're helping them
Yeah.
figure out what to say about it. You have companies writing speeches, companies that aren't in the White House, outside companies writing speeches for our U.S. officials to give. So not even just talking points, but whole speeches about these issues. So it's much more captured or coordinated or
Yeah.
in collusion, whatever the word is you want to use, than maybe most people
Yeah.
would believe or would think.
Yeah. I mean, to me, this is really, if there's a deep state, this is what it looks like. That there's a, powerful control that's not driven by democratic processes, but driven by access, driven by money, driven by revolving doors, where people working for government go into pesticide companies and chemical companies, and then they go back into government and so forth. And that revolving door is in itself a real phenomenon. Carey, thank you for this investigation. Once again, you've surprised someone who prides himself on not being surprisable, but there you go. This was really eye-opening. Defend or be damned, how a U.S. company uses government funds to suppress pesticide opposition around the world. Carey, thanks for this investigation.
We've put a lot of the documents that we relied on, Freedom of Information documents and others, into a poison PR media library on the new Lede website. And so people can go there and they can download the documents for themselves. They perhaps will find information that we missed, but we have already been hearing from people around the world and in legislative offices and others that they're finding this very useful. So I would encourage people to look at that the new Lede, the Poison PR Media Library.
Great. Thanks for putting that together and sharing that. There's nothing like a little bit of sunshine to disinfect a toxic situation like this.
Sure. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Carey Gillam, for coming on the show and for all the important reporting that you do for the new Lede. Ends up in The Guardian and lots of other places. And I want to thank all of you out there for listening. As Carey mentioned in the past,
I protect my sources.
So if you have a hot tip or maybe a box of documents or something kind of juicy that pulls back the curtain on how the world really works when it comes to corporate influence and behavior that affects your health and the environment, get in touch with Carey. If you enjoyed this episode with Carey, you might also want to listen to episode number 4 of this podcast. We spoke to Carey then about pesticides, their links to health issues like Parkinson's, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, childhood leukemia, and how corporations conceal the dangers of toxic weed killers from consumers and even from regulators. It's a great episode. She's a star reporter. You can't go wrong. So if you'd like to learn more and particularly read this brilliant article and Carey's books on the pesticide industry, her exposés on Monsanto, be sure to check out our show notes for additional links to take a deeper dive into today's topics. Make sure to follow our show on Instagram at Ken Cook's Podcast. And if you're interested in learning more about EWG, what we do and how we do it, head on over to ewg.org or check out the EWG Instagram account at Environmental Working Group. If you liked this episode, send it to a friend who you think would like it too. Environmentalism to us is all about meeting people where they're at. And if you're listening to this, you probably know someone who might be interested in today's episode. They just don't know it yet. My ask is that you send it to that person or to as many people as you see fit. Today's episode was produced by the amazing Beth Rowe and Mary Kelly. Our show's theme music is by Moby. And thanks again for listening.